are delving into the Eternal Palace raid that is due to come out in a few weeks, with a look at the first boss you'll encounter in the dungeon,
so
Abyssal Commander Sivara.
So this single phase boss is actually relatively complicated when compared to some of the first raid bosses we've seen in recent times.
Shit.
It revolves around the idea of keeping the raids separated to keep the frost and poison from meeting up and causing raid-wide damage.
So this is basically just like that boss in Hellfire Citadel. What was his name? Zorak. That guy was a real cop.
So how does this work? Well, right at the beginning of the fight, the boss will mark half the raid with frost and half the raid with poison.
Okay.
These debuffs deal a small amount of ticking damage, and both have an additional effect. Frost players have 5% reduced movement speed per stack, and poison players take 5% reduced healing per stack. The marks also give you an extra resource bar that you'll want to keep from filling up. Frost players need to keep moving as their bar will slowly fill up if they're stood still, and if it does feel to full, you'll be stunned for 5 seconds. As for poison people, you need to limit your movement, as your bar will only fill up if you move around. If it ever reaches 100%, you'll be disoriented for 5 seconds.
So it doesn't even matter.
If a frost player is hit with a poison ability, or a poison player is hit by a frost ability, they'll do ticking damage to the raid over 3 seconds, whilst also resetting their debuff stack back to 1.
Oh, okay, that's bad.
Two players of different types touch one another, so you have to split the raid, poison on one side and frost on the other. When the marks are first applied to you at the beginning of the fight, you actually have a short grace period which allows you to pass through other players without triggering the raid-wide damage. This also gives you enough time to get to your correct side. We had frost people move to the far side of the boss, as poison people might get disoriented if they have to move that far on the pole.
Oh no, this is what we're gonna have happen, right? It's made, yeah, it's exactly what I was saying, Maiden of fucking Vigilance, man. This was the most annoying fucking fight in the game. I hated this shit. And I kind of liked it. I kind of like the idea whenever the bosses are very, very, very difficult. The first one's hard, and that way the nubs can't even get into the raid.
Now, with these debuffs in mind, let's have a look at the rest of the boss's abilities.
Okay.
Now, a few players will occasionally be hit with Overflow. This will make them explode after 7 seconds, dealing damage split between all players nearby, whilst leaving a pool of their element type on the ground.
Okay.
This pool will add stacks of its type to anyone who stands within it. Now, although it's possible to solo the Overflow hit, especially on Normal and Heroic, we found it was pretty risky on Mythic, so we always had 1 or 2 people help out.
So you just...
people with the
okay, it doesn't even do
away
anything.
from the group and just make sure they place
like
the
literally
pool
does
out
no
of harm's
damage.
way. On our Mythic testing, we decided to do like a Zul'Harak style strategy, where we decided to have the boss start on one side of the room and slowly drag him whenever the raid started to run out of space on their side.
Right, well, that kind of makes sense.
This did minimize the amount of movement needed, which is great for poison people, whilst also making sure the pools were never dropped directly behind the raid. This helps out for when the boss casts Crushing Reverberation, dealing a burst of damage to the current tank split between all players within 5 yards. This also knocks back every single player in the raid.
It's not a big
deal. So by
deal.
having the pools around 5 to 10 yards to the side of the raid, everyone could just be grouped up on their tank to split the damage, whilst making sure they don't get knocked back into a pool. Now, speaking of tanks, when you are tanking, you'll be receiving a stacking dot.
Oh, that actually does a lot.
You'll create a pool on the ground.
So can't the tank just move into the raid?
And the size of the pool is based on how many stacks you had when it expired.
Holy shit.
We found that taunting around 4 to 6 stacks kept the pool size and overall incoming damage pretty low. You just need to make sure that you move nice and far away from the group when your debuff times out, preferably timing out near the other pools as to keep the room just as clean as you possibly can. Now, one of the cooler abilities happens when the boss reaches 100 energy, because she'll cast Overwhelming Barrage. This creates several bolts around her, frost on one side and poison on the other. These bolts will shoot out in a staggered way over the spell's duration, dealing damage and applying stacks of frost or poison to anyone hit.
So you just don't get hit.
It is possible to sidestep out of the way of these marks.
Yeah, you just don't get hit.
It's difficult to do whilst you're in melee range. We opted just...
No, it's not, because they literally, they don't spawn immediately. Like, they sit there and then they go off. Like, you know what it's going to be before it is.
To move to the side of the boss,
I just watched
matched your mark type.
Hey, just don't get hit.
From triggering ticking damage to the raid. To minimize raid damage further, you should watch to see when a bolt has traveled out from the boss and then move into that gap, as to avoid getting hit by any of the other bolts.
Yeah, duh.
So far the boss has been pretty simple strat-wise, always keeping the poison and frost people apart from one another. However, her last 2 abilities kind of force the different marks to interact with each other. The boss will cast Frost Shock bolts. She will target a random player and then send out a projectile towards them, which is always the opposite elemental type. This projectile will always hit the first person on its path, dealing damage of that elemental type and then pinning them to the ground until somebody comes over and clicks to remove the bolt. Ideally, you will have somebody of the opposite mark take the bolts that targets you, as this will prevent from triggering the raid-wide damage. We decided to have anyone who was targeted to go to the side of the boss that's clear from any of the pools, whilst a non-matching player stands right in front of them to take the hit. Alternatively, you can just ignore the mechanic and just take the raid-wide damage, as only 2 or 3 bolts are thrown out on a row.
This is
and
so
these are
complex.
separated by a large amount of time. Lastly, the boss casts Inversion. This will swap the mark of around a third of your raid. This also roots them for 4 seconds. At the end of the route, anyone within 4 yards that doesn't have the same mark will then begin to proc the raid-wide damage. You need to make sure you move away from those players. And the best way of countering this is just being pre-spread before the ability even comes in. After your debuff is changed, you then want to move to the side that matches your mark. When moving over, people really need to make sure they give them a clear path to the other side, as you don't really want to be touching each other and causing the raid-wide damage. Inversion on Heroic also changes the colour of all the pools on the ground. This is actually pretty useful, as this gives anyone nearby a way of triggering their raid-wide damage and resetting their stacks if they happen to be excessively high. And that's really the last thing you need to worry about on this fight, which is the stacks of the debuff. With the overflowing debuffs that need to be soaked, applying a decent amount of stacks each time you do so, and players likely getting hit by the barrage bolts of their type, player stacks eventually going to get pretty out of control. We found that resetting your stack by deliberately taking the opposite damage type when you reached around 5 to 7 stacks was a pretty good idea, especially if you are poison marked, as you are taking a decent amount of damage whilst receiving much less healing. But you do need to be smart with it. If a large amount of your raid all resets the exact same time, you're almost certainly going to wipe, so you need to do it in a staggered fashion across the entire encounter. But that's everything with the encounter. As you can tell, there is a fair amount of stuff going on for this first boss, and arguably you actually had to have a decent strategy to get anywhere on the PTR.
Okay, I think I figured out the strategy that we're going to use for this boss tomorrow. Let's go ahead and finish up the video and I'll explain it.
That said, we need to emphasize that this is the first boss. Chances are you're going to just zerg this guy down and won't need to have such an organized strategy when it comes to the live version of this fight. But we just wanted to show you what we did, just in case they decide to make this boss as hard as it was on PTR. Okay. But anyway, what do we think?
So yeah, as you said, for a first boss, this guy really does have a lot of moving parts, which isn't necessarily
The fuck do you mean he's got a lot of moving parts? He's got more moving parts than every single boss in Molten Core combined. Like, this is insane. Like, that's the first boss? The first fucking boss has got all this shit going on? I don't even know what to say, man. This is ridiculous. Just skip the boss. We can't. It's the first boss. We've got to kill him. He drops loot. How can we skip something that drops loot? It doesn't make any sense.
Thing. Usually they want a boss which is like has maybe 1 or 2 key mechanics, and usually it's more like cinematic than anything else.
Yeah.
Usually it has like a cool gimmick, like, you know, when you went down the elevator on Talok, or it's just very simple, like the Champion of Light encounter in BOD.
Yeah, that was a
Normally,
joke.
the first boss would allow pretty much, you know, half of the group to not really know what's going on at all. You can kind of brute force it.
That's right.
But it seems like everyone is actually going to need to be on the same page when it comes down to the
This is so
mark.
bad,
It's
man.
having like 1 or 2 players
This is so
constantly
bad.
raid wide damage because they're just completely oblivious to what's going on is very likely just to wipe your raid group. But overall, I am a fan. On Heroic, this boss was missing a whole lot of polish when it came down to like ability clarification, but after Mythic testing, it did feel very, very good. Things are well telegraphed and easy to read, which is mainly why we've been showing you the Mythic footage for most of this video, if not all of it.
Heroic testing was a complete mess.
It was.
All right, so I'm going to go ahead. I'll explain my strategy that I want to use.
Theme with the different marks, and the mechanics interact in simple yet interesting ways.
So here's basically what we're going to do. Is we're going to have generally 2 different sides of the room that people spread out on, and we're going to pop heroism. We're only going to like 3 or 2 heal it, and we're going to try to burn her down so fast that none of the mechanics matter because she's dead. And so that's basically the plan. Is so we're going to try to just burn her down so fast because it's the first boss, right? And if because the thing is that if she's dead, she's not doing any mechanics. And all of the mechanics here, like, we can lose some people. It's not a big deal. Like, she doesn't have that much health. So it's the same as, like, people would even be able to speed kill Zul'Arak almost, right? At the end of a HFC. I feel like this is by far the best strategy that we can use. And that way we don't have to rely on people knowing anything about the fight. That way we don't have to rely on people doing the fight correctly. We don't have to rely on anything. All we do is we sit there and then people just do it or not. social wiping. No, we're not going to wipe at all. It's going to be completely fine. Thinking's hard. Well, it is hard. For people that are in like a pug or something like that on day one, yeah, they're going to be fucking terrible. So the best thing that I want to do for them is make sure that I don't let them basically fuck themselves up, right? And I want to just get the boss done as fast as possible. That's what matters. Yeah, we don't want to have any sort of a strategy. Nothing like that. We just run in there and we kill the boss. That's it. Okay, so it's a pretty easy boss.
It does leave open several different strategy options, which is generally a good thing, but I'm worried that they're just going to make this boss in such a way that none of it's going to matter. You're just going to go in, people Frost go left, poison people go right, nuke the boss, and generally Overflow can just go to the side. If the fight happens to be a long fight, that's where it starts to become interesting, where you need to
That's
worry
a good
about
idea, huh?
management. But chances are, you are literally just going to go on either side, nuke the boss and put the Overflows to the side, and just, it will die maybe in a messy way, but it's going to die in 3 minutes.
That's
so
right.
Who cares if it's messy?
Yeah,
that's
I think
right.
It's a bit of a shame because I think that is very likely to be the case because
it better be the case.
Yeah.
That's my plan.
I think maybe this boss is in the
I'm
wrong
counting
place
on that being the case.
Maybe instead of him being first, he could have been second or third, and you could have put the water boss first.
Well, the
Okay, so that's basically what it is. All right, let's go to the next boss here.